Ethan Mercer had always seen himself as a man who stuck to his principles. Growing up in a quiet Midwestern town, he'd been raised by parents who ran a modest hardware store. People who believed in honest work and keeping your word. His father's advice echoed in his head during hard times. Trust is built one brick at a time, but it only takes one hit to knock it all down. Ethan met Vanessa when he was 27 at a local charity event. She was all fire and ambition, with a smile that could light up a room, and a way of making sure she was always at the center of attention. Compared to Ethan's quiet, grounded nature, she was pure chaos. Still, their chemistry was undeniable. Within 2 years, they were married, full of big dreams about building a happy, stable life together. Ethan became an aircraft mechanic, steady, detailed, reliable. Vanessa launched her own event planning business, feeding off the energy of high-profile clients and late-night parties. She thrived in crowds. Ethan thrived in silence. At first, it worked. To outsiders, their life looked picture-perfect. 2 kids, Sophie and Lucas. A nice house. Laughter in the hallways. But behind the closed doors, things began to unravel. Ethan's long hours left him drained. Vanessa, meanwhile, became increasingly wrapped up in her work and her growing social life. The family started feeling like an afterthought to her, a background set piece she no longer wanted to be part of. Arguments crept in, first small, then louder. They tried to shield the kids, but the tension bled through. Things got worse during one particularly stressful period. Ethan was swamped with a critical job at work, while Vanessa had taken on a demanding client that consumed every spare moment. They barely spoke. When they did, it was clipped, defensive, distant. Then one night, Vanessa just didn't come home. She texted to say she was too exhausted to drive and had crashed at a coworker's place. Ethan wanted to believe her, but something in him shifted. He started noticing the late nights, the missing pieces. Still, he pushed the doubts aside. He wasn't ready to face what those doubts meant. Months later, while searching for Lucas's missing tablet, he found it, proof he couldn't ignore. A string of texts on Vanessa's phone, explicit and emotional, from a man he'd never even heard her mention. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. She was cheating. When Ethan confronted her, she didn't deny it. In fact, she acted like he was the problem. She accused him of neglect, said their life was suffocating, claimed she felt like a prisoner in her own home. Ethan begged her to try counseling, to fight for what they'd built, but she refused. Cold. Final. It's over, she said. And honestly, it has been for a long time. From there, Vanessa spiraled. She came and went as she pleased, disappearing for nights at a time with flimsy excuses. Ethan was left picking up the pieces, managing the kids, the house, the emotional fallout. She seemed to have completely detached from reality, or at least from their reality. It was like she'd already moved on without telling anyone else. Eventually, she suggested a separation, said she needed her freedom. The emotional weight of it all nearly crushed Ethan, but he forced himself to keep going. For Sophie, for Lucas. But even as he stayed strong for the kids, he felt himself unraveling. Each day, Vanessa became more of a stranger. Each absence chipped away at the family they'd built. He couldn't understand how she could just walk away from it all, how she could act like their marriage had meant nothing. It haunted him. One night, after dinner alone and another bedtime story without her, something broke inside him. He left a quiet restaurant, drove back to the hotel room they were supposed to be sharing, and packed up his things. He didn't touch her stuff. Let's see if she even notices it's gone, he muttered. Her makeup, her clothes, her husband, left behind without a second thought. He checked out, drove home, and parked in front of the house. This place doesn't feel like home anymore, he thought. It's a tomb, and I'm just the ghost trapped inside. Inside, the silence hit hard. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. He dropped onto the couch, and the tears came fast. Grief, rage, exhaustion, all flooding out at once. He thought of Sophie and Lucas, and the pain cut deeper. He sat there for over an hour, staring into nothing. Then, in one impulsive move, he stood up, walked to the bar, and grabbed a bottle of whiskey. With a sharp crack, he shattered its neck against the counter and took a swig. The burn offered no relief. His hands trembled. Then came the explosion. He hurled the bottle at the fireplace. It shattered on contact, shards flying, knocking their wedding photo off the mantel. The frame hit the ground and cracked. A scream ripped from his throat, raw, anguished, almost inhuman. Enough, he whispered. This ends tonight. What happened next wasn't a meltdown, it was methodical. Cold. Clear. He powered on his computer. The clock read 10:24 p.m. Let's see how much damage I can do, he muttered. He logged into their shared bank accounts and began transferring every last cent to his personal account. Savings. Vacation money. Grocery funds. Gone. The final number. $17,638.38. He stared at the screen, lips curling into a grim smirk. Revenge on a budget, he said under his breath. He left a few bucks in 2 accounts to keep them active, then closed the rest. But he wasn't done. He sat down and began writing. A letter to his mother. One to Vanessa's parents. He laid it all out, her betrayal, his decision to walk away. No theatrics. Just the truth. Then, something harder. Letters to Sophie and Lucas for their 18th birthdays. These weren't filled with anger. They were attempts to explain, to give them something to hold on to when they eventually asked why things turned out this way. He sealed the letters and packed a small bag. Took a quick shower. Got dressed. Laced up his boots like he was heading into battle. This is it, he whispered to himself. Time to move forward. Coffee brewed in the kitchen as he grabbed his coat and scribbled a quick note on a yellow pad. Vanessa. We're done. Goodbye. Live with the consequences. Ethan placed the note carefully on the kitchen table, setting his wedding ring on top like a final period on the sentence that was their marriage. Then he headed to his office, unlocking the old tool safe Vanessa always hated, said it gave the room a creepy vibe. He never cared what she thought of it. Inside, he grabbed his .357 Colt Python, 2 boxes of ammo, a roll of cash, and their marriage certificate. He stared at the certificate for a beat, then walked back to the kitchen, shredded it into pieces, and pinned them to the wall with a steak knife. A smear of ketchup finished the scene, messy, red, and deliberate. Perfect, he muttered, stepping back. He loaded the F-150 with camping gear, fishing equipment, ammo, fuel, and a few essentials. Then he unplugged the fridge, left the doors wide open, and sliced through the power cord just for good measure. The house, like the relationship, was gutted. Standing in the doorway, he hesitated, a flicker of doubt surfacing. Am I doing the right thing? No answer came. Just silence. Shaking it off, he climbed into the truck and drove into the dark, leaving the house unlocked behind him. The streets were empty. Just him, the road, and everything he was leaving behind. By 1:30 a.m., he pulled into the parking lot outside Harold Stern's law office. Too tired to think, he leaned his seat back, set his alarm for 8 a.m., and let sleep take him. The alarm pulled him awake. Cold coffee in hand, he called Harold. LW, it's Ethan. I need help. Can you meet me at your office? Bring a notary. I'll explain everything then. Is Vanessa okay? The lawyer asked, clearly concerned. Not over the phone. Just trust me. After a pause. All right. Give me an hour. Don't do anything stupid. Thanks, Ethan said, ending the call. An hour later, Harold arrived in his Cadillac. Ethan greeted him with a handshake and a thick folder. Together, they walked upstairs. Inside the office, the smell of old coffee and legal paper hung in the air. Ethan sat down and laid everything out. No tears this time. He told the whole story, how things had spiraled, how Vanessa had checked out long before she ever left the house. By the end, his voice was steady, but the room felt heavy. Harold leaned back and asked, What do you want to do? I want out, Ethan said. Not a divorce. Not a court battle. I want to disappear. She walked away from us like it was nothing. So I'll do the same. And your kids? Harold asked carefully. Ethan looked away. What about them? Are they even mine? She's been so wrapped up in herself, I honestly don't know anymore. She hasn't cared in years. Why should I keep pretending to? You sure about this? Ethan nodded. Set up a trust. My 401k, pension, all of it. Give it to them when they're 21. You and my mom can manage it. I'll sign over power of attorney. I don't want her calling me, chasing me, dragging me back. Harold sighed. We can do that. But if you disappear, she'll eventually file for divorce. They'll post legal notices in the paper. After 2 years, it'll finalize without you. But you won't be part of your kids' lives again. Your mother will be devastated. Ethan's stare didn't waver. She'll understand someday. Have you even considered counseling? Harold asked. For what? Ethan snapped. So Vanessa can cry on cue? Say it didn't mean anything? Tell me to move on and think of the kids. He clenched his fists, voice tightening. She blew it up. Let her live in the wreckage. He paused, jaw clenched. I wish this was a nightmare. I wish I could wake up and none of it was real. But it is. And I'm done playing the part of the understanding husband. Harold didn't argue. What could he say? If my life's in pieces, Ethan said quietly, then hers will be too. Harold looked away, rubbing his face. Just then, his assistant, Tina, stepped in. She paused, sensing the tension. Harold waved her in. Introductions were brief, and she returned with her notary tablet and a cup of coffee. Together, they worked through the paperwork, the separation plan, power of attorney, and the trust for the kids, with Harold and Ethan's mother as trustees. Ethan signed every line without hesitation. When it was done, he handed over sealed letters, one for each child on their 18th birthday. I'm sorry, Tina said softly, as Ethan stood to leave. He gave her a polite nod. His face showed nothing. Inside, he felt completely hollow, drained of everything except a strange, detached calm. Outside, gray clouds blanketed the sky. Fitting, he thought. The world looked exactly how he felt. He drove straight to the bank, pulled nearly everything from his accounts, and left just enough behind to keep them open. At a gas station on the outskirts of town, he filled the truck and 2 spare cans. His last stop was an internet cafe. He logged in and uploaded the letters, one to his mother, one to Vanessa's parents, and several to small local news sites. He attached names, dates, screenshots, everything Vanessa had tried to keep hidden. Then he reported their shared credit cards as stolen and shut them down. She'd walked away like nothing mattered. Now she'd find out what that really felt like. By the time Ethan stepped out of the cafe, the rain had eased, the overcast March sky over Cicero softening just enough to suggest the faintest hint of change. By 2 p.m., he was heading east, destination unclear, just the road stretching ahead. 7 hours later, he pulled into a roadside motel, worn down and anonymous, just what he needed. Sleep, however, didn't come easy. His thoughts ran in circles, too tangled to settle. The next morning, another 6 hours of driving brought him to Golden Beach, Maryland, a quiet town nestled against the Patuxent River. It was off-season and still, a silence that settled over his nerves like a bomb. He parked near a small diner named Sally's and stepped inside. By the door, a corkboard hung crookedly, cluttered with handwritten ads, dog walking, babysitting, used cars, odd jobs. One flyer stood out. Studio apartment. 1 bedroom. Kitchenette. Shower. No smoking. No drinking. Quiet area. $135 per month. Cash up front. Utilities and internet included. Parking for 1 car. References preferred. Simple. Clean. No complications. For the first time in days, Ethan felt something shift, maybe not hope, but the idea of it. He pulled the flyer down and approached the counter. A woman in her 60s stood behind it, smiling warmly. Her name tag read Sally. Well, hello there, she greeted. What can I get you? Ethan held up the flyer. This still available? She didn't even glance at it, just studied him with eyes that had seen enough to read a man in seconds. Looking for a place to stay? She asked. What about work? Ethan hesitated. Both, I guess. With a knowing nod, Sally reached for her phone and dialed. Hey, she said after 2 rings, glancing at Ethan. I've got someone here you should meet. Looks respectable. Yeah, come by. She hung up with a chuckle. Don't worry. They're good people. Hungry? You've got time for a bite? Sure, Ethan said. Roast beef sandwich. Salad with ranch. Sweet tea. Coming right up, Sally smiled, heading into the kitchen. The food was better than expected, tender roast beef, crisp lettuce, a surprise scoop of coleslaw, and tea sweet enough to numb the chaos still swirling in his mind. Ethan was halfway through his second glass when the bell above the door jingled, and 2 strangers walked in. The first, a slim, athletic East Asian woman in her 40s, walked with quiet confidence. The man beside her, older, late 60s, broad-shouldered, sun-worn, carried himself with unmistakable military precision. They didn't speak at first. The man took the stool beside Ethan, removing his sunglasses and meeting his eyes without blinking. The woman sat on Ethan's other side and broke the tension with a soft smile. I'm Natalie Chen, and this is my husband, Joshua, she said. Say hello, Joshua. Hello, Joshua, he said flatly, not breaking eye contact. Natalie offered her hand. Ethan shook it. What's your name? Where you from? And what brings you here? She asked directly. Ethan paused, then handed over his license and gave a vague summary. Nothing too personal. Married? She asked. Yeah, he said reluctantly. Kids? His tone hardened. Yes. I don't know where they are, and honestly, I don't care to. I've done nothing illegal. Morally questionable? Sure. But I'm not here to justify anything. If that's a problem, I'll leave. Natalie opened her mouth, but Joshua cut in. Enough, Natalie. She fell silent, and Ethan turned toward Joshua, whose expression had softened slightly. Rent's $150 a month starting next month, Joshua said. Clean, quiet. Price won't change unless you break the deal. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Shake on it. I'm a man of my word, Joshua said without hesitation. After a long pause, Ethan nodded. Let's see the place. He paid for his meal, just over $5, and left a generous tip. Sally gave him a small nod of approval. Outside, Joshua exchanged a few words with a pair of sheriff's deputies sipping coffee. Then he helped Natalie into a gleaming black Jeep Rubicon Sahara and motioned for Ethan to follow in his truck. The Jeep had Marine Corps and American flag decals. A faded 1970s Vietnamese flag hinted at a past that still lingered. As they drove, Ethan couldn't shake the image of Joshua's rare smile just before it disappeared back into steel-eyed seriousness. 12 minutes later, they turned down a secluded gravel road leading to a small cluster of raised bungalows near the water. A quiet marina stretched out nearby, peaceful and empty. They stopped in front of a modest blue cottage with clean white shutters and a wide veranda. Ethan parked and stepped out, eyeing the sturdy wooden ramp. He took it while the Chins used the stairs, noting the solid craftsmanship beneath his boots. At the top, Joshua unlocked the door and gestured inside. The space was simple, clean, quiet. A narrow hallway led past a small kitchen and bathroom. At the end was a bedroom with windows facing the river. The living room was cozy, with shuttered windows opening onto a wraparound porch. A ceiling fan turned lazily, and a freestanding wood stove sat in the corner, the room's only heat source. Though it was just over 1,200 square feet, it felt insulated, private, more than enough. It was the kind of place you want to disappear. Ethan stepped inside and stood still. He hadn't felt this kind of calm in weeks. No yelling, no accusations, no pity, just silence. He exhaled slowly, letting it settle in his chest. The peace felt almost too good to be real. I'll take it, Ethan said, turning toward Joshua. Joshua raised a hand. Not so fast. How are you paying? Do you have a job? Not yet, Ethan replied evenly. What do you have available? Joshua studied him, eyes sharp and unreadable. A beat passed. Then he glanced at May, who gave a small nod. What can you do? Joshua asked. I'm a licensed aircraft mechanic. I know my way around engines, woodworking, forklifts. I'm a fast learner, and I don't complain. Joshua's posture relaxed just slightly. All right. Minimum wage. Cash. Under the table. You'll work at the Hideaway Marina. Maintenance, hauling, grunt work. You'll wear a Marina t-shirt, pair it with jeans. And every now and then, churches or charities might need an extra hand. They'll pay cash too. Then his tone turned firm. But if you take advantage of anyone's kindness, if you lie, steal, or play games, you're out. No second chances. Got it. Ethan gave a faint smirk. Crystal clear, boss. Be at the Marina Cafe at sunrise, Joshua said, extending a calloused hand. Come half an hour early if you want breakfast. Let's see what you're made of. Ethan shook his hand. Deal. That handshake marked a turning point. In the weeks that followed, Ethan settled into the modest cottage. He rose early, worked hard, and kept his head down. The quiet, disciplined lifestyle suited him. It was a far cry from the constant tension, excuses, and emotional chaos Vanessa had left behind. As the days rolled on, he came to know the Chins better. Joshua had been a Marine scout in Vietnam, where he'd rescued May and her family from grave danger. Catholic charities helped them relocate to the Philippines, and eventually the U.S. Joshua stayed in touch after returning stateside and years later reconnected with May in Oceanside. Despite resistance from his own family, he converted to Catholicism and married her. They raised 4 children, each one following a military path. Joshua's history included combat tours in Desert Storm and an unnamed mission he refused to discuss. He was a man of action, not words, stern, fair, and deeply loyal. May, meanwhile, brought grace and kindness to balance his steel. Ethan respected them. More than that, he trusted them. He kept his aircraft mechanic license active and took pride in rebuilding old docks, sanding down boats, and even repairing outboard motors. Joshua noticed the effort and eventually offered him a formal position at the marina, bumping his pay to nearly $20 an hour. Later that year, Ethan started a small construction outfit. He hired two others, a soft-spoken Navy vet named Logan and a recently paroled ex-con named Miles. Both men worked hard, appreciated the second chance, and together they developed a solid reputation for precision craftsmanship and fair pricing. The Chin's children took to Ethan too, especially Jason, the youngest, who worked as a sheriff's deputy. By the third year, Ethan wasn't just a tenant or an employee. He was family. But no matter how many days passed, the past never completely let go. One night, after dinner with the Chins, Ethan finally opened up about Vanessa. He told them everything, the betrayal, the cold detachment, her absence as a mother. May listened with wide eyes, her hands tightening around her teacup. How could someone do that to their own children? She said without thinking, then quickly added, I'm sorry, Ethan. That was harsh. Ethan's jaw tensed. I care about them, he said quietly. But I can't even be sure they're mine. Trusting her means believing that, and I don't. May offered a gentle smile. I understand. I'm sorry. Joshua, silent until then, finally spoke. You're broken, son. No judgment here. Life kicked your ass, and you took the only road you could see. But you haven't tried to fix anything. You've built a good life, sure. But the bitterness? It's still sitting on your shoulders. Ethan didn't argue. He couldn't. Joshua was right. That lingering anger followed him everywhere like a shadow until one Sunday morning. He was leaving the grocery store, arms full of paper bags, when he heard a scream. In the parking lot, a young woman was struggling against two men near a Toyota Supra. She yelled, shoved, tried to pull away, but no one else moved. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dropped his groceries on the hood of his truck, pulled the folding baton from his pocket, and charged. Hey, he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. One of the men turned, a wrench in his hand. Ethan didn't flinch. He swung fast and hard, cracking the man's wrist. The wrench fell with a clatter. Ethan shoved the injured one into his partner, slamming them against the car. One howled, the other collapsed, clutching his ribs. The woman cried out, fumbling with the back door. That's when Ethan saw the child in the car seat. That changed everything. He yanked out his phone. Mike, it's Ethan. Grocery store lot. Two suspects. Possible abduction or worse. Stay put, Jason replied. We're coming. Ethan stood guard, keeping the attackers on the ground until Jason and another deputy arrived. Weapons drawn, they secured the scene while Ethan explained everything. The woman introduced herself, voice shaking. Sophie Monroe, she said. Thank you. Thank you so much. She was bruised but safe. Her little girl, still strapped in the car seat, had slept through the worst of it. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Purpose. After the report was filed and statements taken, Sophie turned to him. Would you want to get lunch sometime? Just a thank you meal. Ethan hesitated. The last time he'd let someone in, it nearly destroyed him. But this didn't feel like a date. It felt like human connection. Sure, he said. Why not? He locked up his groceries and followed her to Sally's. Inside, Sally waved them over to a table, an unusual courtesy, as she rarely made exceptions. You two here for the hero discount, she teased. Ethan blinked. What? Sophie laughed softly. Mike mentioned it on the radio, Sally said, pouring sweet tea. Word travels fast. Looks like Mr. Quiet here is officially Cicero's newest hero. Ethan flushed, caught off guard. He wasn't used to praise. Wasn't sure he deserved it. But as Sally patted his shoulder with that wide, motherly grin, he couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He felt seen. Small-town life, Ethan realized, came with its own kind of fame. Word traveled fast, and it didn't take long before he became the subject of local chatter. Two older men walked into Sally's just as Ethan and Sophie were seated. After greeting Sally, they turned their attention to Ethan. One, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, approached. Good job, young man, he said, offering a hand. Heard one of those punks had a tool. Glad to see someone still willing to step up. Ethan stood and shook his hand, caught off guard by the praise. The second man, quieter, added, Joshua always had an eye for good people. He shook Ethan's hand, gave Sophie and Vanessa a respectful nod, then headed to the counter. Sally returned, practically glowing. Looks like you're the talk of the town, she teased. This place just became the official home of our newest hero. Sophie laughed. Sally, Can we eat before his head inflates? Sally grinned. Tuesday special, grilled chicken, fries, spinach, salad? Ethan nodded. Sounds great. Sophie ordered mac and cheese and chicken nuggets for Vanessa, who gave a small smile, still watching Ethan with quiet curiosity. As Sally disappeared into the kitchen, Sophie leaned in. Did you know Rachel and her sister-in-law tried to set us up? Ethan raised a brow. Seriously. They figured you could use some saving, she said, smiling. Not that I'm looking for romance. My daughter's my priority. But I guess fate had other plans. She paused, then offered, I'm 29. Divorced for 3 years. My ex was abusive. He went to prison and died last year. My sister handled the divorce. It was her first case. Ethan nodded, listening closely. I'm a licensed accountant, Sophie continued. I co-own a firm with my best friend. Business is good. Life stable. But today, her voice faltered. Those men, what happened, it scared me. Tears filled her eyes, and her voice cracked. Ethan moved to her side without thinking, crouching next to her chair. He wrapped his arms around her gently, and she held on. Vanessa, seeing her mom cry, crawled over and joined them. Ethan hugged them both. For the first time in years, he felt something real. Not grief. Not rage. Just human connection. And it scared him as much as it soothed him. Sally reappeared, concern in her eyes, setting down iced tea and apple juice. Ethan started to explain, but Sophie stopped him. It's just everything catching up at once, she said through her tears. Sally nodded softly and walked away, giving them space. Ethan returned to his seat, straightened his shirt, took a sip of tea, and exhaled. Sophie, I need to tell you something. She looked up, eyes still glassy. When you said your name and your daughter's, I froze. My ex-wife was Vanessa. My daughter, Sophie. It hit me harder than I expected. Sophie blinked, then nodded. That's a strange coincidence. Ethan gave a tired smile. Yeah, life's got a sense of humor. 3 years ago, my wife cheated. Checked out of our marriage and our family. I tried to save it. Begged her to try counseling. She laughed in my face. He looked down. So I left. Took the money. Wrote some letters. Disappeared. I'm not proud of how I handled it. But back then, I didn't see another way. Talking about it now, though, it's like a weight's lifting. Sophie reached across the table, placing her hand gently on his. I'm sorry for everything you've been through, she said. But you've got to heal. Trust me, I've been there. It's possible. Dinner arrived, giving them a pause to breathe. They talked while they ate, about small-town life, her business, the marina, and local gossip. Sophie had lived in Golden Beach for 4 years, ever since her ex's arrest. Vanessa, now 5, had only ever known this place as home. As they finished, Sophie gathered her things and turned to Ethan. Thank you again for everything. Her handshake lingered a moment longer than expected. Her smile lingered too. Then she and Vanessa walked out into the cool evening air. Ethan stood there a moment, then sat back down and spotted the bill. She stuck me with the check, he muttered, amused. Sally appeared, holding the receipt. Don't ruin it, sweetheart, she teased. She's a keeper. Worth the wait. Ethan paid and stepped outside with a strange but welcome feeling stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. Maybe even happiness. Weeks passed. Ethan and Sophie crossed paths often. Coffee, ice cream with Vanessa, casual run-ins at the market. It was never forced. Just easy. Familiar. Slowly, without realizing it, Ethan began to feel like himself again. One Thursday morning, Jason mentioned a barbecue at the Chin house the next night. You're invited, he said casually. Everyone will be there. Grateful, Ethan cleared his Saturday schedule, ready for a night of food and laughter. Friday followed its usual routine: breakfast, boat servicing, engine work. After cleaning up, he put on fresh jeans and a clean t-shirt, then drove out to the Chins. Their log-style ranch sat near the river, with a wide wraparound deck, a patio filled with lawn chairs, a pool, a jacuzzi, and multiple smokers filling the air with the scent of grilled meat. May greeted him at the door with a kiss on the cheek and a big hug. Glad you came, she said. Come, eat, mingle. Children ran through the yard, friends laughed over drinks, and music played softly in the background. Before long, Ethan found himself face to face with Natalie, Angelina, Angie, Joshua, and May's youngest. She was striking. Sharp. Former Marine. Now a practicing attorney with a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in the courtroom. She was dating a pediatrician from Baltimore, though no one was sure how serious it was. Despite the crowd, Angie gave Ethan her full attention. And Ethan, though he wouldn't have admitted it aloud, felt something shift, subtle but undeniable. "Ethan," Angie said, her tone direct but kind. "How are you doing?" He looked up, surprised by her focus. "I haven't seen much of you over the past few years, but from what I've seen and heard, you've made a good impression. That said, someone's very interested in you. Can we talk?" He blinked. "Now, if you're free," she replied, already reaching for his hand. Before he could answer, Mike and Rachel joined them, both wearing knowing grins. "Come on," Mike said. "We've got a spot." They led Ethan to a shaded table beneath a wide tree. Mike handed him a Budweiser, passing white wine to the women. "You might need this," he said, "but pace yourself." Ethan took a sip, watching as Angie leaned forward, her expression shifting from playful to serious. "About a year and a half ago," she began, "I was given an assignment." Ethan wasn't surprised. With her military background and Joshua as her father, he had a good idea who was behind it. He glanced toward Joshua, who was speaking with a group of guests but briefly looked towards Sophie before turning back. "I've been in contact with Harold Stern," Angie continued. "Don't worry, he didn't say anything you hadn't already shared. Just confirmed what you told him and filled in a few blanks. I'm the only one who knows the whole story. Not even my parents." At that moment, her boyfriend Daniel approached and planted a kiss on her head. "Everything okay?" "Yes, dear," she replied, sending him back to the party with a warm smile. She turned back to Ethan, her tone serious again. "Here's the truth. After you left, Vanessa figured you'd cool off and come back. When she found the house empty, she panicked. Thought you'd hurt yourself. Called 911. Ethan's jaw tightened. The police arrived and found the mess, the slashed cord, the wall, the knife, the ketchup. They were furious at her for overreacting. Her parents showed up shortly after and chewed her out for being reckless. Then the emails you sent to the press started going viral. She was humiliated." Angie took a sip of wine. "She didn't file for divorce right away. She spent the money you left, spiraled into debt. Nearly 2 years went by before the divorce was finalized. You've been legally free for 6 months." Ethan sat silently, absorbing it all. She sold the house, lost her job, started drinking, fell in with the wrong people. Her parents took custody of the kids. Your mother visits them often. Vanessa, not so much. She checked into rehab last week. Her parents are burnt out. Her mother's health is failing. Her dad's barely keeping it together. The mood at the table turned heavy just as Joshua and Nat joined them. Joshua's voice was steady but firm. "Son, the truth's out. Your family knows. Her family knows. Nat, and I don't know everything yet, but it's time to stop hiding. This isn't just about you anymore. People care. People are hurting." Ethan exhaled, the weight of his choices pressing harder now that the fog of distance was gone. He glanced over and saw Sophie nearby, speaking with Rachel. A quiet fear crept into his chest. How long could this fragile peace last? "How haven't they found me before now?" he muttered. "I re-registered my truck, updated my license, pay taxes. I haven't exactly been off the grid." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, about that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "When you filed your paperwork, I may have helped. Pulled some strings at the DMV. Your stuff got lost in the system. Any searches just didn't flag." Ethan looked at him, stunned. Angie sighed. "And LW filed your taxes the first 2 years. You owe him for that. Last year you did it yourself, and it was fine. No one was really looking except your mom. She's angry. At everyone. Except herself. She doesn't seem to think she's part of what happened." "Sorry, Ethan," Mike added. "But that's the truth." Sophie stepped over and placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Their eyes met, and he gave her a faint smile. For the first time in years, he felt something new, not fear. Not guilt. Freedom. "I've grown up," he thought. "It's time to stop running." Joshua's voice broke into the silence. "Son, the time for running is over." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right, sir. No more running. It's time to move forward." He turned to Sophie. "Would someone be able to watch Vanessa? I'd like to talk. Just the 2 of us." Sophie looked to the group. Rachel stood up immediately. "I've got her. Go on. Take your time." Sophie smiled in thanks and took Ethan's hand. Nat gave him a brief hug before returning to the table to explain everything to her husband. Ethan followed Sophie along a narrow path behind the house, the trees closing in, offering welcome privacy. 15 minutes later, they reached the river. A wide, fallen tree lay by the bank like nature's bench. Sophie sat on it gracefully, patting the spot beside her. "Come on." Ethan hesitated, then sat down, eyes scanning the quiet woods. Sophie leaned back and closed her eyes, her calm presence somehow unnerving. "You okay?" she asked softly, not opening her eyes. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "This is a lot." "I know. But you're here. That counts for something." He nodded. "I didn't expect this. Any of it." She opened her eyes, turning to face him. "Life doesn't care what we expect. It just happens." Ethan looked away, staring at the still water. "I thought I could outrun it all. The pain, the shame. But here it is, right in front of me again." Sophie touched his hand. "It's not shameful to hurt. It's human. But what you do next, that's what matters." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. There was no judgment in her eyes, only clarity. "I never meant to disappear forever," he said quietly. "I just couldn't see another way out." "You were surviving," she replied. "Now maybe it's time to live." Ethan didn't answer right away. But in that moment, something shifted. Not everything was healed, but the weight didn't feel as heavy. Maybe the past didn't have to define the rest of his life. And maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't as empty as he'd feared. It felt like Sophie already knew how this would end, as if this moment had unfolded exactly as she'd imagined it. Ethan took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "Sophie, I need to tell you everything," he said. "The whole story." Her eyes opened. She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm listening." He shared it all. The betrayal, the despair, the way he drifted through those 3 lost years. He told her about the shame, how he'd avoided mirrors, how numb he'd become. He recounted what Angie had told him earlier that evening and admitted how their first encounter had begun to thaw something frozen inside him. By the end, he felt completely exposed. He braced for pity, or maybe judgment. Instead, Sophie laughed softly. "So," she teased, "you're telling me you're the honorable type? Because honestly, you've been nothing but honorable since the day we met." Her grin was warm, eyes sparkling with something more than amusement. Ethan smiled, a little caught off guard, then gently took her hands in his. "I'm thinking about asking Angie to contact Harold," he said. "I want to see if I can get custody of my kids. Vanessa's in rehab, jobless, and her parents have been raising them. I don't know where I stand legally, but it can't be worse than her situation." He hesitated, then added, "I want to bring my kids here, to my life now. My mom deserves time with them too. But first, I need to build a house, big enough for all of us." Sophie blinked. "You want to do all that?" He nodded. "Yeah, and I care about you. About Vanessa too. I think maybe we could be a family." She tilted her head. "So you're saying you love me, or that you might?" "I think it's possible," he admitted. Then, gathering his courage, he kissed her. It was simple and sincere. For Sophie, it felt like a promise. "You're mine," she whispered with a soft smile. "And I'm yours." She sat up straighter, her tone shifting with resolve. "I know an architect who can help with the house. And Angie can start the custody process with Harold. Don't worry about legal fees. We'll figure it out." Ethan nodded, overwhelmed, but hopeful. Without another word, he pulled her into a hug. Their laughter blended with the wind rustling through the trees. 45 minutes later, they returned to the party, brushing leaves and grass from their clothes. Sophie's cheeks were flushed. Ethan's grin was the widest it had been in years. Over the next few days, plans began to take shape. Angie contacted Harold to start the custody case. Ethan met with Joshua to discuss buying land and designing a home big enough for his kids and an extra room for his mom. He even offered his current cottage to Vanessa's parents if they wanted to stay nearby. For the first time in a long while, his life had direction. Sophie accompanied him to meet with the architect, who offered practical suggestions and an affordable estimate that surprised Ethan. The following Monday, Ethan applied for a construction loan. Angie and Harold began outlining the custody case. Harold explained that Ethan would likely need to return to Illinois for court. With 4 weeks of vacation saved, Joshua told him, "Take as much time as you need. Family comes first." Angie strategized the case with Harold through calls and emails. Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophie's relationship deepened. Ethan remained guarded, but 5-year-old Vanessa had no such hesitation. She clung to his hand, giggled constantly, and demanded bedtime hugs and kisses. Her boldness peaked one day when she asked, "When are you going to marry my mom? I'm getting old, I need a dad." Ethan burst out laughing, completely disarmed by her timing. When the court proceedings began, they went smoother than Ethan expected. While some of his past choices raised questions, none were illegal. Vanessa's parents supported his petition and appreciated his offer to let them live with him and the kids. Angie and Harold delivered the proposal, explaining that Ethan assumed they might not want to speak with him directly. To his surprise, his former in-laws were eager to reconcile. They expressed regret and offered support. In the meantime, Ethan's life continued to blossom. His construction business thrived, and the new home came together fast. Within weeks, the foundation, frame, and roof were complete. By the second month, the house was finished. Sophie, Vanessa, Nat, Angie, Rachel, and even Sally helped decorate, transforming the space into a warm, welcoming home. Just as Ethan received notice of the court date, Vanessa completed rehab and was trying to put her life back together. Her house was headed for foreclosure, and Harold began managing its sale. Ethan packed his truck, hugged Sophie and the rest of his newfound family, and headed for Cicero. Angie promised she'd join him for the trial. Returning to his hometown felt like walking through a dream. His old house looked abandoned, overgrown lawn, broken garage door, boarded-up windows. He didn't stop. Instead, he drove to his mother's small apartment. She opened the door with tears streaming down her face, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. She smiled, radiant and full of forgiveness. "You're home. That's all I care about." She carried his bag to the guest room and returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Harold will be here soon," she said, settling beside him. "But right now, I just want to look at you." 2 hours later, Harold arrived with Tina Morales. After warm introductions, they sat down to go over the case. Angie would fly in Friday. The trial was set for Monday. "The judge is strict but fair," Harold said. "He doesn't tolerate deception, but he also knows families are complicated. We'll need a solid, honest argument." He looked Ethan in the eye. "Be ready for tough questions. He'll push." Friday afternoon, Ethan picked Angie up from the airport. She greeted him with a bright smile and a teasing punch to the arm. "Ready to fight?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, more than ever." During the ride back from the airport, Angie updated Ethan on her legal research and the quiet but firm support from her fiancé, Daniel Brooks. The next day, the legal team, Harold, Angie, and Tina, gathered to finalize their strategy. Angie's research added confidence, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling something was being held back. "You're just nervous," Harold reassured. "Everything's fine." Monday morning was cool and clear. Ethan arrived at the courthouse sharply dressed but tense. Outside courtroom 319, he found Harold, Angie, and Tina waiting. As they exchanged quiet greetings, the elevator doors opened. Vanessa stepped out with her lawyers, flanked by Nina and Heather. She looked pale and worn down, her once vibrant features faded by time and damage. She spotted Ethan but was gently steered away by her attorneys. "She looks rough," Angie whispered. Ethan's reply was cold. "Pity, huh?" Moments later, the elevator opened again. Ethan's mother and Vanessa's parents stepped out. His mother hugged him tightly, followed by a warm embrace from Vanessa's mom, unexpected, but genuine. Vanessa's father extended his hand. Ethan hesitated, then took it. She just went in. Vanessa's father smiled faintly. "We're here for you, son." She had her chance. "It's your turn. Just be respectful." Overwhelmed, Ethan pulled him into a bear hug. "Thank you, Dad." Inside the courtroom, Ethan took his seat at the plaintiff's table. His mother and former in-laws sat quietly behind him. Across the aisle, Vanessa and her legal team whispered among themselves. A pair of reporters occupied the back row, looking half-interested. At 9:05, the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Lucas Kincaid, Family Court Judge." The judge entered, sat, and rapped the gavel once. Case 213, James R. Mercer versus Vanessa Hale for custody of 2 minor children, Sophie Louise Mercer, age 12, and Lucas James Mercer, age 9. Child and spousal support are also on the table. "You may be seated." He glanced through the case file. "Are all interested parties present?" Vanessa's lawyer stood. "Craig Dalton for the defendant, Your Honor." Vanessa Hale. Harold stood. "Lewis W. Pierce for the plaintiff, James Mercer." The judge nodded. "This appears to be a custody and relocation case." "Ms. Hale, is that accurate?" Vanessa stood shakily. "Yes, Your Honor. My ex-husband thinks I'm unfit and wants to take my children away." "And you two are divorced?" "Yes, sir." "May I ask, why?" Ethan tensed, ready to speak, but Harold placed a steady hand on his arm. Not yet, he whispered. Vanessa cleared her throat. We were out dancing at Morrison's. It was a tough month, and we were trying to celebrate. Ethan and I argued, and he... Objection, Harold cut in sharply, rising to his feet. On what grounds? The judge asked. Ms. Hale's statement is misleading, Your Honor. Dalton jumped up. Your Honor, this is unnecessary. These personal details aren't relevant to custody. The judge paused. Objection sustained. However, since Ms. Hale hasn't been sworn in, we'll proceed with caution. He turned back to Vanessa. Ms. Hale, please clarify. What happened that night? Vanessa froze. I can't. It's not what you think. Dalton rose again. Objection. Any insinuation into my client's personal life is inappropriate and irrelevant. Harold remained calm, exchanging a glance with Angie. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Hale, are there allegations of misconduct involved here? Please be clear. Vanessa shrank into her seat, visibly trembling. Turning to Harold, the judge asked, Can Mr. Mercer provide clarity? Harold nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Ethan stood. Swear me in. Objection. Dalton snapped. This is a one-sided narrative and inadmissible. Objection overruled, the judge said firmly. Bailiff, swear in the witness. The bailiff approached. Place your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do, Ethan said, voice steady. State your name and address. James Mercer. Hideaway Marina, Golden Beach, Maryland. Proceed. Ethan took a breath and began. He described the night they went to Morrison's, the argument, the silence, Vanessa going to the restroom and never coming back. How she stayed out all night, never called, never explained. She just left, he said. Didn't say a word. So I went home and did the same. At least I left a note. The courtroom went silent, broken only by Vanessa's quiet sobs, until she suddenly exploded. You abandoned me and the kids, you coward. Ethan stayed calm. Just like you abandoned me. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. Any more outbursts and I'll clear the courtroom. He turned to Vanessa. Is Mr. Mercer's account accurate? Tears streamed down her face. She hesitated, but finally whispered, Yes, Your Honor. Everything he said is true. I ruined everything. The judge sighed, turning back to Ethan. While I sympathize, leaving your children for nearly 4 years is a serious matter. Ethan began to respond, but Angie quickly stood, placing a hand on his arm and guiding him back into his seat. The judge continued, voice firm. This is a complicated situation, but truth matters here. Motives matter. He looked between both tables. We'll reconvene after lunch. I want full clarity on both parental capabilities. That includes current employment, housing, and familial support. He banged the gavel. Court adjourned until 1:30. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan sat in silence, emotions swirling. Relief, regret, hope, all fighting for space in his chest. He felt Angie's hand on his shoulder and looked up. You did good, she said softly. Ethan nodded, unsure if he believed it. Your Honor, may I address the court? Angie asked. And you are? The judge replied. Natalie Angelina Chin, Mr. Mercer's attorney from Maryland. There are people here who can provide additional context, she added. The judge nodded. Proceed. Joshua Chen stood first. Your Honor, I've known Ethan for 4 years. When he arrived, he was broken, but he rebuilt himself. He's proven his integrity and character. One by one, others stepped forward. Joshua's family. Sally from the diner. Finally, Sophie Monroe. She spoke with calm confidence. Ethan saved my daughter and me from a carjacking. He didn't hesitate. He's kind, dependable, a man of honor. This case is part of his healing. I love him, Your Honor, Vanessa blurted from the defense table. The judge's gavel cracked twice. Control yourself, Ms. Hale. We'll take a recess. Court resumes at 2 p.m. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan turned to Sophie, voice low. So, you love me? Sophie blushed. Yes. And now you know. Ethan smiled. Good. Because I love you too. He kissed her gently, their hands still entwined. Their friends and family watched with warm smiles, some hiding their reactions behind chuckles and blushes. Together, they walked to a nearby steakhouse for lunch, the tension melting into laughter and relief. The legal team was buzzing, particularly Angie, who'd masterfully assembled a bulletproof support network. Harold leaned toward her. If you ever get tired of Maryland, call me. I'll find you a desk in my firm. At 1:45, they returned to the courthouse to find chaos at the defense table. Vanessa was gone. Her legal team scrambled to explain her absence but produced signed, notarized documents. Vanessa had conceded to all of Ethan's claims and voluntarily waived her parental rights. Ethan sat in stunned silence. What does this mean? It means you won, son, Harold said. She's relinquished everything. The divorce was finalized months ago. This was just the rest. Angie placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. It's over. Move forward. You're free now. Ethan whispered, it's really over. But the weight of it sat heavy. At what cost? His next step was picking up his children. They had no idea what had just changed. Outside the school, Ethan stood with Sophie and Vanessa's parents as the final bell rang. Kids poured from the building, laughing and yelling. Sophie and Lucas spotted their grandparents and ran toward them until they saw Ethan. They stopped, stunned. Then both screamed, Daddy, and sprinted into his arms. Where have you been? Why didn't you call? Where's Mom? Ethan held them close, choking back tears. Sophie watched quietly nearby. After a long hug, Ethan gestured toward her. Kids, this is Mrs. Monroe. She's a good friend. They eyed her curiously as Ethan continued. How about we head to your grandparents' house for lunch? You'll meet some more of my friends. They agreed excitedly, piling into the car with their grandparents. At the house, a backyard gathering buzzed with music and laughter. After lunch, Ethan gathered everyone. He took a deep breath and looked at his children. Your mom, she's left. I don't know where she is right now. We'll try to find her. But for now, it's just us. Sophie frowned, but didn't seem surprised. It was clear Vanessa's absences had become normal. I went to court, Ethan said. And I got custody. Your grandparents supported me. Now, you can live with me or stay here with them. His daughter was the first to speak. She cheated, didn't she? Lucas nodded. There were always different guys. Travis was the worst. The silence was heavy until Sophie stepped closer and squeezed Ethan's hand. Lucas noticed. Is she your friend? Ethan hesitated, cheeks reddening. Yes, she is. Sophie stumbled slightly and bumped into him, making little Sophie giggle. Oh yeah, she's definitely his friend, she teased. Sophie grinned. My name's Sophie too. Mine's Ellie, but everyone calls me Sophie, the younger said. The moment lightened the mood. Lucas studied Sophie, then looked at Ethan. She's suitable. What do you think? Ethan laughed. Yeah, I think so too. Over the next 2 days, Ethan shared his plan to move everyone to Maryland. The children were thrilled, especially knowing their grandparents would come along. Surprisingly, the grandparents agreed. A fresh start, they said, would be good for everyone. Preparations moved quickly. Vanessa's continued absence simplified logistics, though emotions still ran deep. Ethan's mother held a garage sale. Vanessa's parents packed their home for sale. With paperwork finalized, the convoy left Illinois. Ethan's father-in-law drove the kids. Ethan rode in the moving truck with his mother. After 3 days, they arrived in Golden Beach. The children raced through their new home, excitedly claiming rooms. The grandparents admired their nearby house, thrilled by the ocean breeze and quiet streets. Nat and Rachel welcomed them warmly, handing over keys and walking them through the houses. That evening, Ethan walked into the living room and found Sophie surrounded by the kids. His daughter looked up with a grin. So, do I get a sister with my new mom? Ethan blinked. Maybe. Did I forget to mention that? She laughed and hugged him tight. Thanks, Dad. Lucas added, now I get why we needed so many bedrooms. In mid-August, Ethan and Sophie were married in a small lakeside ceremony. It was simple, just close friends, family, and a handful of guests under a warm sky. Their honeymoon in New Orleans was quiet and joyful, filled with food, music, and time to breathe. When they returned to Golden Beach, life felt right. Settled. Real. Vanessa remained missing, drifting somewhere in her own storm. But Ethan? He had built something strong out of the wreckage. He had love, family, a home. Was he happy? Yes. Had he made all the right choices? Maybe not. But he had peace. And for Ethan, that was more than enough.